If you Google the UUA, the Unitarian Universalist Association, and Easter together, you will find this statement. For many Unitarian Universalists, the resurrection narrative is often more metaphorical than literal. Rebirth of nature, resurrecting hopes and dreams, resurrecting dead relationships. In a general sense, the ultimate triumph of life over death. Hallelujah. Kind of like the beginning part, that part about the resurrection story often being taken metaphorically, that versus literally, and that list of how we might emphasize that concept of nature and relationships, I'm all for that. But I think that last statement of that, in a general sense, the ultimate triumph of life over death just doesn't quite sit with me. I think that word triumph hits me wrong. I don't know. Triumph is sort of a victory, and honestly, there really isn't a victory over death. Death happens. It happens to us, it happens around us, and we fear it, we accept it, we move towards it every day. Sure, we can rise from the experience of death happening around us in multiple ways and forms, and the grief that accompanies it. We learn to move through the grief of losing loved ones. We manage to live with the grief of what is happening to our planet. Many of us even face our own deaths with curiosity and courage. And we live in these bodies, these friggin' miraculous bodies that have skin and hair and liver and stomach and intestines and bones that are constantly in the state of the old dying off and being replaced with the new. And we live in the story of life, death, and forms of resurrection all the time. I remember singing the Eucharist acclamation when I was in Catholic churches growing up. It's the one that goes, Christ has died, alleluia, Christ has risen, alleluia, Christ will come again. A couple more alleluias. I loved the sound of it. I loved singing it with everybody, but I didn't really think about what I was singing. I just followed along in the order of service. And now when I kind of think about that in a UU perspective, I find the focus on Jesus's death and resurrection without that broader context of who he was as a person who spoke out and acted against empire and who taught us about centering love and care for one another. Just that focus on the life, on the death and resurrection just falls flat for me. So many of the teachings of Jesus were rooted in wisdom and courage and love that ultimately caused his demise, as that kid story kind of said, by the bullies. It's risky business when you start to call out empire and exclusion, hypocrisy and greed. As UUs, when we think of Jesus and the lessons of the Bible, we kind of focus on Jesus's life. He's one among many wisdom teachers. His death, crucified as a criminal, speaking out these words about those who had killed him, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. This is powerful for me. Not his death, but the way he approached his death, and that in the Christian story, they have him rise from the dead. That death isn't actually the last word. I do want to veer off to the side for 1 minute to let you know that there are actually Unitarian Universalist congregations here in Minnesota and throughout the country who hold this time in the Christian liturgical calendar as very sacred. 3 of my colleagues who I was with last night held Maundy Thursday services at their UU congregations. And Unity, which I find so interesting, they've had a traditional Maundy Thursday service for as long as I can remember. This is how they describe it in their kind of advertisement for it. It says the word Maundy comes from the Latin word mandatum, or commandment, which Jesus gave to his disciples. And then in quotes, a new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another as I have loved you. And then they describe the service as a contemplative service which remembers Jesus on the last night of his earthly life by rituals of washing feet and sharing communion. So I just want to kind of give you a perspective of that. I think it's important that we recognize the diversity within our own denomination. I actually also talked to the minister from Minnesota Valley UU who has started a Christian fellowship as part of their UU congregation. So if that's something you're interested in, let me know and I can connect you with them. Here at Michael Servetus Unitarian Society, we tend to grapple with the idea of Easter with reverence, kind of coupled with disbelief. How can we approach the story of Easter morning that starts with the tomb where Jesus was laid to rest being found empty? There's mystery inherent in this story, a transformation of a body that once was, that existed in flesh, that is no longer in that form, a body transformed into something else. I listened to an Easter homily delivered by Richard Rohr. I love him. He's a Franciscan friar and an ecumenical teacher. I appreciate how Rohr takes the extraordinary life and death of Jesus and he moves it toward the ordinary, something that exists like not that long ago and recorded in the Bible, but actually also exists today. He started a homily on Easter homily, speaking of a Black woman whose son was shot unjustly by a white police officer. And he talks about in the middle of her immense lamenting mother's grief, she was asked if she would donate her son's heart to a white man. And she said yes. He quoted her saying, "Because I know that I want my son to continue this mystery of life and death in the human race." And then he poses the question, what is the life that this woman had access to that most people don't? Why is it that these extraordinary human beings emerge here and there and everywhere in all of history? He challenges us to think of the Easter story not as a single man, Jesus, and the miracle of his life. He says Jesus is naming the miracle and revealing the miracle that is everywhere all the time. He says in a statement that Jesus is teaching us how reality actually works. Another Christian theologian who we studied a lot in seminary, Walter Brueggemann, he says the Easter question isn't about whether you can get your mind around the resurrection, because you cannot. Rather, the question is whether you can permit in your horizon new healing power, new surging possibility, new ways of power in an armed, fearful world. New risk, new life, leaping, dancing, singing, and praising the powers beyond all our controlled powers. I feel like what we're talking about here might be called like the little r resurrection, kind of not the resurrection that is in the story of Easter necessarily, but the idea of resurrection, the capacity for transformation, the stories we all know or have lived of finding strength while in the depth of a time of darkness, making a choice or finding a different way that may have been unimaginable before, looking back at our lives and the lives of others in awe that wow that comes to life when we observe a small r resurrection of a new life, a new love, new trust, new hope. Beloved farmer and poet, philosopher Wendell Berry ends his poem, The Manifesto, the Mad Farmer Liberation Front, with 2 words: practice, resurrection. Before these words, he encourages readers with this poem. So friends, every day do something that won't compute. Love the Lord. Love the world. Work for nothing. Take all that you have and be poor. Love someone who does not deserve it. Denounce the government and embrace the flag. Hope to live in that free republic for which it stands. Give your approval to all which you cannot understand. Praise ignorance for what man has not encountered. He has not destroyed. Ask the questions that have no answers. Invest in the millennium. Plant sequoias. Say that your main crop is the forest that you did not plant, that you will not live to harvest. Say that the leaves are harvested when they have rotted into mold. Call that prophet. Prophecy such returns. Put your faith in the 2 inches of humus that will build under the trees every 1,000 of years. And later he says, swear your allegiance to what is nighest in your thoughts. As soon as the generals and the politicos can predict the motions of your mind, lose it. Leave it as a sign to mark the false trail, the way you didn't go. Be like the fox who makes more tracks than necessary, some in the wrong direction. Practice resurrection. practice resurrection. There's action in that phrase. I always love it when it's like something action oriented, a call not to give up, to stay engaged, to push yourself, to not be compliant, to invest in the future, ask questions that have no answers, invest in the millennia, plant sequoias, invest in life, your own and that of the earth. Stay curious, stay connected, plant trees for the future, practice resurrection. In a post online, Brother Thomas of the Society of St. Francis shares, while working in a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon, I had a customer comment on my tattoo. It's scrawled across the outside of my forearm in ornate script, and it says, practice resurrection, complete with the period. The customer, as he grabbed his cup of coffee off the counter, said, what's that about? He said, it's the final line of a Wendell Berry poem. Yeah, but what does it mean? He asked. I think it means that we all have something to get up from, I said. Brother Thomas continues, I've had this tattoo for nearly 10 years, and the statement is still true. It sits there as a reminder on my arm. It's time to get up. You can do this. Go on. Keep practicing resurrection. And I do it the best I can. I don't believe that the words are laced with condemnation. I don't think that they are saying I need to practice resurrection today because I failed yesterday and my pile of things I need to get up from is only growing. I think the term practice in this case means something closer to opportunity. Today, I get to be a participant in resurrection. And if I'm participating, then that means this piece of humanity is participating. And if through me, humanity is participating, then it means that a little piece of the world is being made whole. Practice resurrection, it whispers, not just for you, but for a world that so desperately needs it. I think we all have something to get up from. Isn't that the truth? Actually, we are given things that we have to get up from across our lifetime, sometimes many at a time. At other times, we get a reprieve for a while. Some experiences that we have to get up from, like the death of a loved one or the loss of something precious, whether that's a physical ability, mental ability, or a job. Some of those things you will forever be changed in the way you see yourself and your relationships in the world around us. As Liz and I talked about this service, she shared the impact of Buddhism and what that practice of meditation has had on her. It's not just a practice of sitting in meditation, but also the philosophies and the beliefs that Buddhism have helped her and so many others navigate these superhuman lives that we all live. Buddhism brings suffering into the neutral zone of sorts, meaning it accepts that suffering is a part of life. And with that acceptance, and without the need to label it as unfair, why me, why not them, our struggle becomes not with what is, but instead of how to live with what is. Easter is Kongo Roshi, the Zen Buddhist from the Zen Buddhist Temple of Chicago, describes a Buddhist perspective on Easter. He says, Easter is a religious holiday of great significance for Christians who on this day celebrate the resurrection of Christ. From a Zen point of view, the rising up from the dead can also be very symbolic. The rising up from the dead, but in Zen, the idea is to rise from the dead each moment. Most of us, in our everyday waking lives, we must wake up. Wake up. Wake up, he says. This is the Zen idea, the Zen goal. Zen is a philosophy of the here and now, not the then and there. This moment contains everything. I don't know if any of you have heard from Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams. She's described as the most vocal and most intriguing African-American Buddhist in America. She gave a Dharma talk on what she called persistent rebirth. She focuses on those ideas, those words individually. Persistence, that part of us who remains in your life throughout your life. It's the experience and choices that go with us as we go through them. And those of you familiar with the William Safford poem, I always like to think of it, it's like that thread you follow, that no matter what in your life, there's always some thread there, even though a lot of things may change. It's that persistence, that core, the thread that remains consistent, though you've changed throughout your lifetime. And then she talks about rebirth. And she speaks about the complexity of holding these two in tandem. We were actually talking about it during a Soul Matters group last week. She says that every one of us knows that we have rebirthed or resurrected ourselves during our lifetime over and over again. She points out that as we age, we're no longer the age we were in the past. We're no longer young children or teenagers. If you're an adult, we're no longer the same person in a relationship. We're not the same child to parents, parents to our kids, spouses, friends, etc. She describes it as we keep falling away and arising again and again. We show up every moment, with each moment slightly different than the one before. We've taken another breath. We've had another thought. Something different is moving through our digestive system at that moment. We continuously meet the moment that unfolds. This is a basic Buddhist premise. So those two words, persistence and rebirth, they can create kind of a conundrum, says Kyodo Williams. When we focus on the sense of shedding and moving on, it doesn't honor the persistence, and yet both exist. We live with a connection to the persistent self and also have to be willing to let go in order to be present and open to the future. So what do we do with this story of Jesus and resurrection? Those of us who are Christian may celebrate the biblical story and the miracle described within. Others who approach the world through a different theological lens may question the possibility of such a description of event. Many ask if this is actually true. And if the answer cannot be proven, then it's just discarded. But even if one were to take the accounts of Jesus' resurrections in the gospel as a myth, it still warrants attention. Myths, after all, are not about something that actually happened, but instead they illuminate something that happens over and over again. They may point to a human strength or a vice or some aspect of the human condition that happens to all of us. The Franciscan brother and Angel Kyodo Williams, they both speak of practicing resurrection and rebirth. UU minister Richard Gilbert writes, "The tomb is no place to stay. When each morning announces a reprieve and we know that we are granted another day of life, the tomb is no place to stay." I think we all have something to get up from, says Brother Thomas. A tomb is no place to stay when granted day after day a reprieve and we are granted another day of living. I was going to say Kyodo also talks about the same idea that I talked about earlier, that not only do we rebirth ourselves, but that we can rebirth society as well. I'm not going to go deeply into that, but I think it's an interesting idea that when we're doing these little acts of rebirth and resurrection, we are impacting more than ourselves. So I don't want to focus just on our country today, because that is really a hard thing to sit and hold for a long time. So instead, I'm just going to bring a final reflection on resurrection. Each month, we have our 60+ gathering at Pilgrim House, where we talk about a monthly theme and then we eat lunch together. And our dear Ed Burek over there caught my attention a few weeks ago when he literally used the word resurrection. Laura peeked up at that moment when he described what happened to his life. Ed described how his wife Kathy came back from church one day and informed him that she had signed him up to play music. It's what we had called special music during a Sunday service in a few weeks. Being the wise man who Ed was, he didn't try to get out of it. Instead, he got his saxophone and began practicing. Ed described his career as being heavy in the area of data analysis. He was a number guy. But in his retirement, his identity shifted. Throughout the years at MSUS, he has played with a variety of musicians, performing in concerts and contributing to Sunday morning music. As he talked about his transformation, he said, "Now, if you ask me what I do now, I would say I'm a musician." Then he said that resurrection word, which just tickled me silly. Practice sax, practice resurrection, I guess. I love the idea of rebirth of sorts, something like this happening throughout our lifetimes. We are just given this one precious life, folks, and with all of its complexities. I return to Congo Roshi, who says, we embrace much of our lives like we do like the blossoming trees. We want life to stay a certain way, frozen in time, but life is always changing. Life starts, life ends. Our bodies and our world are constantly in motion, from the mountains to the trees to our hair, our souls. We transform. It is concurrently beautiful and sad. And when we reject impermanence, we reject life. For hope lies in impermanence. Practice resurrection, rebirth. Leave the tombs of despair and see if a new life can emerge. Resurrection opens the door to hope. It brings us into a power of life found in a greater love that is at the center of our faith. So in the weeks and days ahead, just slow down out there and watch the earth unfold. Witness that endless miracle of growth, and remember that you too are a miracle. Turn your face to the light and let the warmth remind you of your goodness and the gift of our lives. Practice resurrection. May it be so.